A very good afternoon to all of you. My name is Avinash Khurana and I am the moderator for today's webinar. It gives me an immense pleasure to welcome you all to an HRM webinar on the theme Thrive, Not Survive, Adapting to Radical Uncertainty Using Whole Brains Thinking. The webinar is divided into two parts, learning session for 45 minutes and Q&A session for next 15 minutes. We would like to hear from you and would like to include your questions in the conversation. So ask questions, use the chat panel on the right side of your GoToWebinar player to share at any time during the webinar. It's my privilege to have with us Mr. Anand Khote. A very good afternoon to you, sir.
Very good afternoon,
And
buddy.
now may I request Mr. Anand Khote to take the session forward. Over to you, sir.
Thanks a lot, Avinash. Thank you, all the participants. Very good evening and warm welcome to this webinar. Thank you, Aman Rajabali on the call, who is Vice President for NHRD in Pune chapter. Thank you, Avneet. Avneet is part of the Young Leader Forum of NHRD Pune. And our webinar coach, teacher, friend, philosopher, Prasad. Thank you for accepting the offer and being with us today for this webinar. I have the privilege to introduce Prasad. We have been working on this webinar for about 3 to 4 weeks, trying to put things together. Prasad heads the organization called Empowered Learning LLP. He only has 27 years of experience in industry. Long way to go and continue to get more experience, Prasad. 27 years and counting. His expertise are in leadership development, organizational process, strategic planning. He worked with more than 100 organizations with their leaders and their teams in, either in the coaching environment or org design environment. He's also the founder president of ICF Pune chapter, and he's extremely passionate about whole brain thinking as a concept, and he's passionate about individual as well as group coaching. So we are all excited and keen to learn from Prasad today. The more questions you ask, the more richer this experience becomes. So folks, feel free to put in your questions in the question section of the webinar. Avneet is going to keep a track of those, and she will post those to Prasad as and when required. And so don't necessarily have to wait for end of the webinar for your questions. So with that, we get going. Prasad, over to you. And in the interest of bandwidth, other than Prasad, we will kind of close our cameras and then we'll switch them back on as and when needed. Okay. Thank you and all the very best.
Thank you. Yeah.
Go ahead, Prasad.
Yeah. And good afternoon. It's a pleasure being here. And I would also like to thank NHRD and chapter for inviting me. We have been working on this for quite some time. Well, like all of you, I'm at home. It's day 52 of the lockdown, and I'm positive that things are going to change. But it is what it is. Okay. In this session, for example, but before I begin, I'd like to thank all of you. For responding to the questionnaires that I had sent you on the Google form. Okay, and the answers were actually very revealing, and I'll go through the questionnaires questions one by one, to get a sense of how this whole thing actually emerged from all of you. The first question really was, how are you adapting to COVID-19 world professionally and as personally? And please share an example of this. Here we are. Okay, right. How are you adapting to a COVID-19 world professionally and personally? And please share one example of each. What really emerged was everybody is extremely positive about this. Things are actually working quite well. People are finding a balance between the personal and professional life. There's learning, there's reading, and eating well, which is good. They are spending some time on personal time and reflecting who they are. So that's really wonderful. Okay. The second question, how prepared are you or your organization to deal with the short-term and long-term risks, as well as any blind spots or unseen problems? Here, there's a degree of caution. Okay, most people are saying that they're preparing, they're getting ready for what's going to come up ahead, and they need to think. So, a little more of a caution, which is understandable. The third question is, what initiatives are you taking to involve people across your organization to come up with ideas and solutions to deal with this situation, and this is important? Unequivocally, everybody feels that everyone must be involved in this process, which is very useful. And is it important? Absolutely. And many of you, for example, are brainstorming, are connecting with employees, and someone even came up with a great idea that they've started an innovation Premier League to capture all the ideas. I must get in touch with you later to find out exactly what you're doing. It's very innovative, right? The last one is, do you believe that COVID-19 presents opportunities to transform? And if so, what is being done? All of you believe that this crisis presents a great opportunity to reform, and and that is extremely important. So on that note, okay, if you've observed, and I have, that most of us, just a minute, yeah, okay, most of us, for example, focus on our beliefs and focus on feelings, okay, our feelings and behaviors, right? Which is interesting because even before post-COVID, I've noticed that in organizations when you work with, they focus on their feelings and behaviors. But how many of you have really, spent time thinking about the way we think, about the way you think? And that isn't really, happening as much as it should. So in today's session, I'm going to spend time focusing on how we think, how thinking the way we think can make a big difference when we try to adapt to this environment, and how whole brain thinking is really going to help us as we go forward. Okay, and if you see, this crisis actually has happened in a very short period of time. As Lenin said, okay, as Lenin said, there are decades when nothing has happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. And in this period where things happen, I said it very nicely, the nature of this crisis is that it's crunched up. It's happened very quickly. So who do we actually then go to in order to find the answers? And that's where Rafe Sagarin, as you can see over here, has come up with this idea that nature has been surviving and thriving for almost 3.5 billion years, and which is true. And Rafe Sagarin is very okay, right? Just a minute. Right. Avinash, just a minute. Am I sharing my slides? Avinash? Yeah. Are my slides being shared?
Slides are visible.
Okay, slides are visible. Excellent. I'm just checking. Right now, Rafe Sagarin is a world famous marine biologist who spent years studying about the adaptability of nature and adaptation to nature. And I heard about Rafe Sagarin when I had gone to Monterey many years ago in California, where he was a part of the tidal pools, studying tidal pools in California. And one of the things he said, as he said, that nature has actually spent so many years and animals surviving in nature, that he drew some principles from nature which were applied to organizations all across the world. In fact, he has consulted to governments all across the world in areas like security and terrorism threats, where they were stuck for new ideas. They didn't know how to respond. And Rafe Sagarin wrote a book called Learning from the Octopus: How Secrets from Nature Can Help Us Fight Terrorist Attacks, Natural Disasters, and Disease. And that was his claim to fame. And some of the principles that he's come up with, I'm going to share here. Learning from the Octopus: How Secrets from Nature Can Help Us Fight terrorist attacks, natural disasters, and disease. Yeah. So what are these principles? The principles, the first principle that he came up with was, we can change the slide, please. Yeah. Yeah. Living with risk. Okay. You can't eliminate risk. You can only live with it. And the importance of looking at risk is to leave your comfort zone. Because like COVID-19 is going to be endemic, it's going to live on. For example, one of the things that he said very interestingly is that the fish doesn't try to turn a shark into a vegetarian. Okay, it understands that the shark is a shark. You got to live with it. So we got to live with this. We got to move out of the comfort zone. The second is don't plan or predict to be perfect. We've got to organize and respond. You know, human beings always try to be perfect. It's not going to happen. Not in this crisis. Okay, survival of the good enough. Most of nature is not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the good enough. And that's where he spent a lot of time in his examples explaining that we just got to come with good enough examples. So therefore, in organizations today, the generalist versus the specialist, many times the generalist is also good enough in terms of solving problems. Decentralize and use redundancy. Decentralize is very interesting because if you look at octopus, and that's a famous example that he gives, is that octopus have skin cells all across the tentacles. And when there is a challenge or a problem, they don't go back to the central CPU. In fact, the octopus is the most smartest creatures alive. And if they hadn't lived for more than 2 years, they only have a short span of 2 years, they will conquer the world. But what they do then is that each central cell takes its own decision and and covers the octopus with ink and camouflages the octopus. So decisions have been taken by each individual cell of the octopus, right? And second is symbiosis. Symbiosis is extremely important because one of the challenges that we're going to have as we go forward is that every department, every organization is going to reach its limits of adaptability. Okay, and for that we need to come together and cooperate. For example, the sales and the manufacturing have to come together in ways that we've not yet seen. We've got to work with our vendors, we've got to work with our partners, we've got to be symbiotic because together we can extend the limits of our adaptability and also learn from success, not from failure, because learning from failure, according to him, is an evolutionary dead end. It's not going to work, right? And we've got to look for successes that we keep, so small successes that we keep as we come up with new ideas. And I'm going to share some of these principles which Rafi came out with you as we go forward. Okay. Yeah, next slide, please. We have one unassailable advantage over animals, okay? And that is the fact that we can think, okay? And because we can think, we have agency. And that's very critical. You know, we have a prefrontal cortex over here that's for the last 2 million years really has been helping us become far more than anybody else. And because we can think, we have three factors that that shape the way we think. The first is nature and nurture. We are who we are. Okay. By the time we're 18, okay, we don't change. You know, we change, of course we do, but we are fundamentally the same. And over a period of time, of course, because of feedback, because of certain life events, because of our own maturity, we start changing as people, but fundamentally we don't. And nature and nurture, basically, there's a huge debate on nature and nurture throughout on which is more important, nature or nurture. And throughout the literature, you'll find that this is a very critical, aspect of research, very simply because, environment and genes have so many connotations. Eugenics, for example, the way Hitler did it many years ago was basically on a flawed understanding of nature and nurture. But today, our understanding very clearly, it's not nature or nurture, it's nature and nurture. So the genetic variances that we have, and not genes, genetic variances define who we are along with our nurturing, right? So for example, nurturing at home is effective till you're 14 or 15. Parents fondly believe that they can have control of their child over 15. It doesn't work that way. What works after 15, of course, is the nurturing that they get from their peers and from the environment around them. But we do play a role till we're 14 and 15, right? And after that, the organization that they join. So both these factors are repeatedly going to come up in terms of shaping how we think, right? We don't see things as we are, we see things as they are, we see things as we are. Okay? So the other factor that's important is what we call as dominance, right? Nature is built in redundancy, as you saw the earlier principle. What is redundancy? We are either left-handed or right-handed. We could do without because we have two hands, if something happens to one hand, we can still function. But of course, what happens is that we specialize in one hand, either right hand or left hand, because then we start, I can sign with my left hand, but why would I want to do that? Okay. I use my right hand because I'm right-handed, because I can use it without thinking. It becomes my preference. I use it without thinking. And that's how we sort of start shaping and doing the things that we do. And just as we have dominance in terms of our left and right hand, we also have dominances in the way we think. Okay, and that's critical. And all this conversation that we're going to have so far, gentlemen and ladies, is really about preference. It's not about competence. Whether we understand it or not, and unbeknownst to us, preference drives so many things that we do. Our careers, the occupation that we choose, what we do, who we join, the kind of work that we like and we don't like. Preference is at the heart of it, right? So let's go to the next slide, please. Right. This is the whole brain thinking model that we're talking about. Each of these four quadrants, are four independent ways of thinking that are all equally important, right? They're like four rooms in a house. When we're born whole. But as we grow older, because of nature and nurture again, we tend to prefer certain rooms. Why? We really don't know why, but it's again because of nature and nurture. For example, some of us may prefer one room, which is 7% of the population. It could be any one of these rooms. 60% of us prefer two rooms, which could be any one of these two rooms. 30% of us prefer any one of these three rooms. And 3% of us are naturally whole brain. We're comfortable in all these rooms. Okay. So what do these rooms signify? Right. Those of us who are more dominant in blue or prefer blue, because again, nature and nurture, for example, are very logical, are rational, prefer facts, and we ask the questions what and why. These are the kind of people, when you meet, are really concerned about their time. For example, if I were to meet with you and you're high blue, the first question I ask is, Prasad, that's great, but what you would like me to do is get to the point, so that you don't want me to waste your time. Because being blue or high blue, as we call it, we're very focused, we're very task focused. Okay? We look at the whole day in terms of tasks, and that's what we want to complete. We're efficient, and therefore what happens is that if I sense that you're going all around the place, you're not coming to the point, I lose interest. Okay? And we like to ask the questions what and why. Okay, why is this happening? What is this happening? In fact, in WhatsApp, when I get so many messages from people who give me the what and the why of the COVID crisis and everything, I know where he's coming from. For them, their comfort is in data, okay, and the numbers, and that's really important for us to understand. Okay, are they good in crisis? They are, because they're not emotional. They focus on the data and they try to take things action. But because they have a narrow, actually, vision at times, those of us who are blue may tend to miss out on the other things that other people see. Okay, so that's a challenge, and we'll come back to that more a little later. Those of us who are more green, again, why? Because of nature and nurture, focus on planning and are safekeepers. We avoid risk. Okay, we tend to organize ourselves very well. We're very detailed. Okay, very specific. We prefer the status quo. Process is critical. And who do we trust? We trust people who have come with proven ideas. We're not interested in doing anything which hasn't been done yet. Okay, so people who are very high, for example, green, are extremely consistent, very reliable people to have on your team, very structured, excellent people. The question that they ask is how. Okay, for example, the question that the person who's more dominant in blue will ask is, why has this COVID crisis happened? Why? That's what do we do and why? The person who's more green is really asking, how do we manage the risk coming out of the COVID crisis? How do we manage work from home? How do we do all these things? So he or she is focused on ensuring that the how is in place. They're not really concerned about the why. Okay, And why is this important? Because as HR leaders, most of us, we need to understand how people actually see the same situation. They all see things differently. Okay? Those of us who are more red, okay, focus on people, on feelings, on emotions. Okay, they're extremely competent, but they have a different way. They're very intuitive, and they're a different way of looking at the whole situation. For example, if you give them a call, they're most likely to ask you, I sense from your voice that you're disturbed. Tell me more. So they're really tuned into that, into the people aspect, and they build relationships. For example, a person who's high blue, if you were to, he's your friend, he's a good friend of yours, he gives you a call and he says, hi, Prasad, I'm here, I'm in your office, I just thought I was dropping by, let's meet for a coffee. If it's not a schedule or if you're tied up, you're likely to say no very easily. For you saying no is not difficult, right? You will say no, okay? Why? Because it's a task, it's coming in the way. A person who's red will drop everything and adjust everything and actually go out for the coffee. I'm sure many of you have done that. Why? Because having coffee is important, because a person who's high red is focused on building relationships. Relationships are critical. Therefore, a person who's more red can do things that that the other person who's high blue does not. It's not logical for him. How can he do that? But you can, because of relationships and the networks you build. Okay. Those of us who are yellow focus on the future. We're experimental. We have a different timeline of risk, unlike person who's more green in the way he thinks things. Because I have a much longer timeline and the way I manage risk, for me everything is an experiment. Either it works or not, and the nature of experiment.
Prasad, I'm unable to hear you. Just checking with the rest of us. Are we in a position to hear Prasad?
Okay.
I can hear you now. Aman, can you hear?
Yes, now he said okay. That was what I could
Audio seems to have gone off. I got a message from a.
Yeah, in between the audio had gone. So Prasad, can you speak up now?
Have you missed anything out before?
About 30 seconds or so.
Can you count? Is that better?
Yeah, better.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I rewind? Can you go back to the earlier slide? I'm not done with this. Okay.
And just one request, Prasad,
Yeah.
if you can speak slightly slowly, because you are going
Okay.
much faster. Some participants, due to network as well. Just slight slow will be good.
Okay, fine. No problems.
Thank you.
So, yeah, thank you. Right. So now I'll just rewind a bit. When it comes to yellow, right? Yellow is about being experimental. People who are more yellow focus on looking at a wider and a longer view of things, because that's how they see risk and manage risk. Okay. For example, because they view actions as terms of experiments, failure is more a given than success. So they don't never beat themselves up if things don't work, and they take risks because, according to them, not taking a risk isn't a bigger risk. They're already talking about post-COVID right now. They're not even thinking about what's happening right now, because they're always thinking about the future. So people who are more yellow are useful because they're able to see behind the curve, as it were, and able to intuit patterns that you and I normally won't see. Therefore, they have a bigger picture view of things, and they can actually give you a much more comforting view of things. See, many of us, the way we experience the crisis, the way we experience risk, depends a lot also on how we think. Okay, a person who's more blue will focus on data all the time, and he draws his comfort from data. If the data is not there, he's going to be a little upset. The safekeeper has to have his routines in place. So 1 month in lockdown, most of you who are green would have established a very clear pattern, a routine that you can follow. Okay, which is true of most people. People who are red would have done a lot of video conferencing calls, dinners, chats over virtually, because that social connect is still critical, right? So each of these 4 quadrants actually are independent of each other. But remember, we're not just blue, green, red, and yellow. We're a combination of all these factors. Each of these are mindsets. Okay, as we go forward. Okay, and I'll come back to this more as we take this forward. Can we go to any questions so far that I need to answer here? I'm perfectly fine answering some of these questions if there are any.
Yes, sir. So there is a question which says, what if a person in red dislikes someone? This is by Sapan Agarwal.
Sorry, what is the question?
What if a person in red dislikes someone? By Sapan Agarwal.
Yeah, most people in red actually are fairly emotional. So if the person in red, for example, dislikes someone, he is less likely to confront that person. Okay, he is more likely to sort of move away and avoid confrontation with this person. Whereas the person who's blue will have it out straight away. Okay, if you I sense you don't like me. What's going on? Okay, a red won't. He'll nurse it inside for quite some time. Okay, and not bring it out. Yeah, because a person who's red, Avneet, likes to personalize things. Okay, which means that I will try and know more about who you are, what you're doing, and personalize, make you feel very comfortable being who you are. That's what they do naturally. Yeah.
Okay, sir. And Satya wants to know if you can re-explain the what and how things.
Okay, great. On the
what and how of things. Right.
The how. The how?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
How.
Yeah. So, for example, those of us who are more green in the way we think, okay. For us, for example, we want to know exactly how things are going to happen because we are practical. We're not interested in data beyond the point. Okay, data is important enough for me to actually make things work. If I have enough to make things work, I want to see the end point, the end game, and it has to be practical. The applications have to be clear to me. If they are not, I'm not interested. Okay. Because the person who's green is very grounded and he wants practical solutions to what's going to happen. Whereas the person who's more blue, the what and the why, is interested in the analysis. He's not really interested in how things are going to happen. Yeah. For example, if we're going to say work from home, the person who's green would want to know exactly what is work from home and how is it going to work, what's going to happen, how am I going to do that? All those are questions that they come up. So they need more time for them to process this. You can't just bring about change suddenly with a person who's green. Yeah, sure.
And so there's Navneet.
Yeah,
He
okay?
wants to know how the survival of good enough theory has come about.
Sorry, good enough.
Yeah, how has the theory come about?
The theories come about good enough from the research that Rafe Sagarin did in his work with aquatic animals, especially octopus, fish,
Right.
the complete wildlife in the California coast, which is huge. And what he discovered was it's not really about survival of the fittest. It's really about organisms, adapting enough for them to procreate and pass their genes on. Okay, that's it.
Okay, and so there's one more question which says, how is this profiling different from MBTI? This is by Bhaskaran Rajendran.
Yeah. Sorry?
Sir, can you hear me? So Bhaskaran wants to
Sorry?
know how. Okay, so
Yeah, I can hear you.
Bhaskaran wants to know how is this profiling different from MBTI? The introversion, extroversion, sensing, intuitive, thinking, feeling, judging, perceiving. How is this theory different from
Right.
that?
Yeah. It's very different because HBTI is based on trait thinking, and MBTI is based on type. type indicators. So MBTI is fundamentally about personality, and this is about thinking, right? So they're not separate. In fact, if you've done your MBTI, the HBTI will help you a lot to understand how you think, and vice versa. So if you've done your HBTI, MBTI would also help you understand. So they actually are, they're complementary. They're not separate. But HBTI is designed for business, unlike MBTI. So you can actually apply HBTI very easily to your situations, which is the big difference between HBTI and other, this whole brain thinking and other instruments.
Okay, sir. So those are the questions so far. I think we can move on to the next section.
That's right. Yeah. Can we do that? That's profiling. Thank you. Let's just change the slide, please. Yeah. Here we are. Right. This is a sample profile that you have. In order to get this profile, you have to go online and complete a 120 questionnaire. That the output of this is this whole profile. As you can see, these are preference codes and the profile scores. Now, the preference code of 2211 indicates your your primary thinking preference and your secondary thinking preference. So in this case, for example, if your score is above 65, which is the two outer concentric circles, the two outer concentric circles, that's your primary mode of thinking. Okay. And if your score is less than 65 and more than 35, that's the third circle from the circumference, and that's your secondary mode of thinking, and the preference code is 2. And the inner circle is your avoidance, that's your blind spot, and the preference code is 3. So we have 3 modes of thinking or types of thinking. A preference 1, which is a primary thinking, our secondary thinking, the code is 2, and our avoidance or tertiary thinking, the code is 3. So in this profile, as you can see, so this profile basically is dominant in yellow and red and not dominant in blue and green. So these are like light bulbs which are constantly on. The intensity of blue, of red and yellow for this person are much higher than green and blue, but everything is on at the same time. So my preference is for yellow and red. That's the lens with which I will see the world. Okay. So for example, and the dotted line indicates how you think under stress, right? So the way you think under stress could be quite different from the way you don't think under stress. For example, in this profile, you see this person is far more red in stress than he otherwise would be. Okay, and that's true. So for example, some people are far more blue under stress than they are. So they're far more cold and more, non-emotional under stress than they are. So there are various combinations of that. But in this profile, this is how it is. So what did this tell us? This tells us that, blue and green, in a way, are what we call as left-brained, and yellow and red are what we call as right-brained. Okay, though left and right brain are now, a mere construct. The brain doesn't work that way. It's far more interconnected than what we thought 10 years ago. But still, it's a useful concept to have, right brain and left brain. So here, this person is more right-brained, more conceptual, more, focused on ideas, on metaphors and analogies, whereas the person who's more blue and green is focused on getting things done, very here and there, very, very specific about everything, right? Task focused. Blue and yellow, for example, are what we call as cerebral, which is intellectual, and green and red are what we call as limbic, which is getting things done. So there are 4 modes of thinking really as we go forward. Okay. Now, in this, for example, you can see that if you were to, for example, put a nail on each of these 4 corners of the quadrant and put a rubber band around it, what we're saying really here is that you need to stretch yourself. Or you don't have to change who you are, but in a given situation, if you stretch yourself, in this case, in green and blue, when required, you have to be situationally whole-brained. So all we need to do really is not change who we are, but recognize that we need to be situationally whole-brained in order to be effective. So if you have to be more adaptive in any crisis or situation, especially now, based on our profiles, are we being situationally whole-brained? Is a very important question that we need to ask us, and that is actually our way of adapting to a situation, and in this case, a crisis. So a person over here, for example, shouldn't be too emotional about what's happening. Look at the facts, switch into red, into blue, understand what's going on, move in, think about how important it is to plan. Is there evidence? Is there a process? And in that process, what happens is a person can get a more balanced or a whole brain view of the situation. And that's why it's important not just to think for yourself, but to work with others and leverage the thinking of others as we take this forward, which is really the conversation for my the next part of the session. How important it is to work with other people and use their thinking as well as we go forward, which is exactly what what happens in nature. Collaborate and be symbiotic with people who think differently than you. Okay. Can we move to the next slide? Here we could do after this slide, we could do the poll. Yeah. Okay. We could do the poll now, if that's okay with you, Avinash. And then come to the slide.
Yes, sir.
Can we go to the next question? Yeah. Avinash, there are 3 questions here on this poll.
Yes, sir.
Can you share the rest of the 2? Yeah. The next one. The third question. Be good. Shall we? Yeah. As you can see, these various functions, the profiles of people can vary across functions, and this is an interesting style. Okay, interesting slide, because what's fundamental when it comes to presentation over here is people must be comfortable being uncomfortable at every level in the organization. I'll repeat: people must be comfortable being uncomfortable at every level in the organization, for which people must be comfortable doing what they're doing. Now, typically, what you notice over here is that different functions have different mental demands of the task on hand. So these are the typical profiles that would be most suited for each of these functions. Many times what I've noticed in organizations is that people who think differently work in functions which are actually quite not suited to the way they think. Because they're competent, they do a good job, right? So competence has got nothing to do with it. But somewhere along the line, they have a preference for doing something else. So in my experience in working with organizations, I've always encouraged organizations to re-look at their job descriptions, even HR leaders and functional leaders, look at the mental demands of the task on hand and match those tasks to the person who's actually doing it. So in many cases, for example, it's been very gratifying when someone who's very high yellow is, for example, a salesperson who was, selling conventional products, existing products that, there was not much of a challenge. And he was very high yellow. Because of this recognition that he's high yellow, the organization actually deliberately changed his job, changed the content of his job to allow him to sell new products, go to new territories, new ways of doing things, and he flourished. Because because the way you think can't be you can't be learned beyond a point. It is who you are. Okay. And when you, for example, are allowed to think and work in a job which fits your profile, people start flourishing, and it's a great way of motivating people. Okay, and also to releasing an energy in organizations, and it's simple. Okay, it's not very difficult at all as a change to take place. So that's what so one of the biggest advantages of whole brain thinking is matching thinking to the demands of the job. And once people are comfortable in what they're doing, because the job mental demands of the job match their thinking, they are more motivated, they take more efforts to learn, they challenge themselves, and they're open in moving to areas of discomfort. For example, in his case, it was green. So because he enjoyed his job so much, he moved and learned how to be more green. Remember, the rooms of the house are not blocked, they're preferences. We choose not to go there. Okay. And because the organization spoke that language, it was much easier for people to make that move. Okay. So adaptability is an inherent part of an organization, and you start building resilience within. Yeah. The next slide. Yeah. Engage every brain. Okay. So I'm going to look at some practical applications of whole brain thinking in the next 5 or 6 minutes before we take on more questions. Right. Okay. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. Here you are. This is what we call as a dominance map here. As you can see, SP over here, the profiles of all of this group are actually plotted against, the centroids are plotted, and you get a visual map of the way that the whole group thinks. And you can see SP is an outlier. Okay. The challenge in organizations is many times there are a lot of outliers in groups who tend to submerge their thinking to fit in to this group over here, the SKRS, and because they think differently. Once you recognize that SP, for example, in one of the organization that I worked with, SP was a very different person. He was an IT, a software guy who was actually extremely yellow. So, and he couldn't fit in with the rest of the the programming team because of the way he thought. So once they recognized this, they started giving him roles and work that enhanced his thinking and allowed him to contribute very significantly to the team. He came up with innovative ways of actually looking at coding and different ways of doing things, and that actually helped the team tremendously. So this is a great way of actually ensuring that people who are important to the organization don't get left out. Okay, people, if SP is not treated, if SP is not is forced, not forced, but thinks like everybody else, he probably will leave, and that's what happens in many cases. Yeah. Can we go to the next one? Okay. This is an example from the Forest Services Department of Agriculture in the US, where the earlier slide, please, where, for example, a long-standing study was conducted to find out what made very effective teams. And what they actually, and the study is available. If you wish, you can always write to me separately, and I'll send you this study. It's fascinating, this case study. What they found was that if you kept all parameters the same, all parameters the same, but changed only one, which is the way they think, right? Got people who thought differently into the same team, assuming, of course, the competence level was the same. Productivity increased by almost 66%. And that is enormous increase in productivity. So when you build a culture in the team that allows diverse thinking to flourish, where differences are honored, then you start having leaps of productivity, which are critical. And in today's world, in the post-COVID world, we're going to have teams working far beyond their existing levels of capability. And they can, provided, we allow them to think and allow that differences, the energy that differences create in thinking to come into place. Yeah, can we have the next one, please? So if you want to summarize the takeaways from this conversation so far, to engage every brain, there are three things that we can do, right, which I think are very critical. One is what we call as creative abrasion. Okay, it's really about honoring differences. What is creative abrasion? It's a fundamental process when people who think differently and are highly competent are allowed to challenge each other, disagree with each other, without any fear that the person will be offended, or there will be a problem in the relationship, because everyone speaks the same language. A case in point for this was a person called A. I'll call him A because he's a good friend of mine. He was working with this engineering company which manufactured bearings, ball bearings, a world leader, of course. And one of his challenges was he saw an opportunity, of a huge opportunity worth 3,000 crores of a very special ball bearing, and he was fascinated by this. Right? It's a massive, massive, huge bearing that they use in mines, right? A swivel bearing. And one of the it was his mission for the last 3 to 4 years in the organization to ensure that he puts up a team and that they tackle this. He knew the opportunity was there, but A was very red. Okay, and because of that, his emotions used to come up all the time in the conversations. After the session, and after I had a conversation when working with the team, he realized that he had to change and engage with people who thought differently. In this company, which is a Scandinavian multinational, most of the decision makers were high blue and green. That's who they were, right? So he spent 6 months creating a big case study, blue and green, absolutely blue, outlining the advantages of all of this. And finally, what happened was within immediately after 7-8 months, they created a global task force for addressing this problem. And now, they've, I think, sold at least 1,500 to 2,000 crores. Okay? So from nothing to 2,000 crores simply because of creative abrasion, right? The second is heterogeneous teams. This is where we put thinking to use, as I explained last time. Okay, can we, as Rafe Sagarin says, decentralize, create small, effective, guerrilla, heterogeneous teams of people who think differently? Give them challenges. Don't issue orders. Give them challenges and ask them to address those challenges, and be surprised what people can do. Okay, the ideas that will come up will be very, very different. Secondly, being whole brain is good enough. Okay. For example, if we can look at all 4 quadrants and ensure that we've addressed all 4 quadrants in the way we communicate with people, we engage people, we take decisions, our approaches, our decisions, our engagement, our communication will be good enough, because beyond 15 people, everyone is a whole brain. Okay. So there are all elements of all aspects, all quadrants of thinking in any team above 15. So organization is actually whole brain. So if I can be whole brain, I'll be reaching out to almost everyone. Okay, and there's very less likelihood of anything going wrong, on things not happening the way we want it to. Okay, right. We go to the last slide. Yeah. Can we have a last poll, Abhijit? The second poll. Can we do that now?
Sure, sir.
Another 10 seconds and we move to the next question. Next one. The second of the yeah. Right. So, Avdit, are there any questions so far? Can we get the poll results or how's it?
Yeah, sir. We have about 3 or 4 questions now.
Okay.
So I think Kalindi Kali has a question. She's saying rational is her dominant and experimental is secondary. What does this imply?
This probably implies that you're cerebral in the way you think. That means you focus on ideas and concepts. Okay, so between thinking rationally and looking at the bigger picture, you would rather focus more on the data and the facts first, and then look at the concept. So it's a consulting profile. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Then we have a question by Girish. We have a few by Girish. The first one is, in the different profiles across functions, there is no profile for a leadership role. It mentions a managerial role. What happens to a leadership role?
Typically, I didn't bring that because there was little time. We've done profiles across CEOs and leaders of various organizations. So if you take an average profile of a CEO, what happens is usually the CEO is more whole brain with a higher element of yellow. And the reason is that it's true actually. It's actually very interesting. And the reason because of that is that CEOs usually the route to a CEO is that they've actually handled different challenges throughout their lives, right? The different challenges. So they are trained by circumstances and experience to see things from all 4 quadrants, even if they don't know anything about it.
So it's like a bigger picture then.
They'll have a bigger picture because of who they are, but they'll also look at data and facts. They'll also look at the process. They're very concerned about people. So it's a sort of it's a natural way of looking at all 4 quadrants.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
Again, Girish says, a leader would probably be the one who can take on all different colored profiles along and achieve the results. What category would he or she be? And I think that's an extension of what you just said.
Yeah, usually that's not quite true, actually. See, there's no ideal profile. It's by circumstance, usually, that a leader is whole brain because of the work he does. But you have leaders who are very high blue. That's it. But leaders who are aware of the way they think, okay,
right,
and adapt and allow people who think differently to also flourish are actually far more effective. Because someone can be very high blue and that's his strength. Usually, in a financial services industry, he's extremely blue because of who he is. But as he moves up the leadership chain or ladder, he recognizes that strength is not the only strength anybody should possess, and allows people who have different abilities and different thinking preferences and styles to also flourish.
All right, so there's another question which says, if a leader needs to be whole-brained, then how does he or she train in order to become whole-brained? And any specific training methodology or curriculum that he should be going through?
There isn't really. It's actually a school of life, really. Because you see, it's just incidental that the experiences a leader has, that it tends to be whole brain. But once people at any leadership level know how they think, okay, they can be more flexible to become situationally whole brain. So the key is not being whole brain per se, is recognizing that you need to be situational whole brain based on the situation. So once you're situating your whole brain, which means that you focus on all four quadrants. Suppose you're very high blue and green, and if the situation demands that you focus on red and yellow as well, and you're aware of that, and you stretch yourself into both yellow and red, so you become situationally. That flexibility is what you need to develop. Okay, then you can go back to being who you are. And many examples of leaders who actually are.
Okay, so Manmeet Bajwa asks, is it possible for someone to fit into two quadrants? I think this is again an extension of what we were just talking about.
Sorry?
Is it possible for someone to fit into two quadrants?
Absolutely, yeah. They can fit into all four. Somebody can be both red at the same, blue and red at the same time. These are opposing quadrants, and that's very interesting because you're both blue and red at the same time. So it's fine.
And so, what would be the kind of implication that would have if you're in diagonally opposite quadrants in terms of your behavior,
so
or perhaps
it means that there's a lot of fairly internal conflict in terms. For example, if you're both blue and red, what it means is that you understand, you want to say no, but your red finds it difficult to.
Okay. It's more of a predicament
so
that you keep facing then.
Yeah, you'll have to resolve that. Yeah.
Right.
But you can make the various other nuances as well. Yeah, but this is one of them.
Sure. So then there is a question by Yogesh Nair. It says, wouldn't putting teams in different thinking patterns increase conflict within the team? And what can be done to avoid this?
Absolutely, there's no question about it. That's why it's creative brain, right? If teams understand each other, see, one factor which helps in this process is that most people are open to feedback about their thinking, okay, rather than getting feedback about their behavior earlier on. Most of us, for example, are wary of giving feedback. Conflict happens when I don't give feedback in time. So therefore, there's an issue. Okay. Yeah. And that's because how to communicate that person's behavior, right, to that person in a way that the other person doesn't take it personally. In thinking, that's not the problem. I can tell you, for example, Avneet, that you need to be more blue, and you'll say, yeah, okay, fine, that's great. What do I do? So it's much easier for you to accept feedback than it would be otherwise. So in these teams, for example, once everyone is aware of how they think, and you're going there and you have the dominance map in front, everyone's aware of what can happen, right? So you create a culture where you strongly encourage people to challenge each other in a way that is very objective. So that works, actually. So yeah, and there is a certain amount of conflict, but it's a very positive conflict, which actually you challenge each other. You don't have to agree to. So if a person who's very high blue challenges you and you're red, it just forces you to raise the standard of your thinking, which is, it's not personal. That's the key. Yeah, it's not personal at all. Yeah.
Okay. So I think Manmeet has an extension to a question which says, is there a specific tool that can assess this model?
Yes, there is a tool that assesses this model. What does that mean?
So if there is a specific tool that we could use in psychology that would assess a model like this?
This model has been validated. This model has been actually very strongly validated every 2 years. Okay, so there are papers available on the validation model. So this model actually has been around for almost 30 years. It started by a person called Ned Herman, who was the head of GE in 1979. He's actually worked on this. So throughout the last 40 years, it has been extensively validated under a lot of parameters, and it's constantly validated throughout. Yeah.
Okay.
So from a validation.
So Swapna wants to know, if associates just recovered from COVID-19 and hence do not engage in any category of red, green, blue and yellow, what will you suggest to these associates?
I don't really understand that question a little bit. I mean, if you could clarify.
Swapna, if you could just perhaps elaborate a bit on your question.
Avneet, if I can step in, I don't think anybody, going through COVID-19 as a health situation will change their personality profiling from any of the quadrants. Yes, for initial few days, because they may have had good amount of contemplation or fear or whatever it is, I think once they are fully recuperated, their core personality will will be there what it is. So, I think we can go to the next one. But if she elaborates more and changes her question, we can pick it up.
Sure.
Thanks.
Sure. So there is Ibrahim. He's asking, can you give an example, a life example, for accessing all four quadrants? So perhaps maybe a situation in which one would take a journey of thinking through all four quadrants.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for example, let's take the existing situation and you want to adapt to, working from home, let's say, from all four quadrants. The first thing you do from a blue quadrant is to say, why do you need home and what do you need to put everything in place? Okay. So, what are the specific objectives and the outcomes that you need from working at home? You check with your boss, suppose if it's an organization. So, there are certain limitations of working from home. So are we clear about what is expected and what is not? Okay. And what are the objectives? Okay. Let's be clear about that. So that's what a person who wants to know. Okay. What do you want from me at the end of the day that is acceptable to you? Okay. Let me agree to that. That's clear. That's clarity. That's it. The person who's green will say, how am I going to do that? So if you give that person a checklist of 15 points on what to do, okay, how do you sit, how do you put the computer, what do you do, exactly how you do it, that person is going to be thrilled. Okay, right? Excellent. Person who's red is going to say, for example, I get disturbed by 1.5 hours of constant thing. Can I take some breaks? Is there some way of us engaging in some light stuff? Or can we have some free time where I can do other stuff so that I can re-energize myself, talk to other people? I feel very closeted. So that's red, right? So can I engage with other people in a way that's different? So that's red. And yellow would be, for example, what's next? Okay, what more can I do? Okay, with this, can we do interesting stuff? Why do we have to do only this? Why can't we do something else? So can we use a different software, different profile? Okay, can I make this more interactive? So those are the four quadrants. I mean, people who think differently will adapt differently, and you'll see the workstation is going to be very different. A person who's yellow, very, very different. Okay. Right.
So sir, can you perhaps pick up on a person's thinking journey on the kind of workstation that you said, that this kind of setup that he has? You think one could draw inferences from that as well, by just like passing through cubicles and then perhaps patterning them?
And that's actually true. So our thinking actually reflects. For example, a person who's both blue and green will have very sparse, very blue will have very, very Spartan kind of a desk, very functional.
Okay.
A person who's green will have a very neat desk, everything very well organized, okay, and labeled. You cannot take a person green stapler from his desk, please. You can't. It's a crime, okay, without telling him.
Right.
You've noticed it. You take something from his table without asking her table. That's a no-no, right? A person who's red will have pictures of family photographs, trip to Mathiran, Mahabaleshwar, family, friends, all of that stuff there. Last year's birthday cards kept over there because that card was so cute, all that stuff, right?
The feeling, yeah.
So cute. I can't remember. I love it so much, right? And mugs which are very different. And a person who's yellow would be very different, teddy bears, something that's different, okay? A poster, okay? Outside the way of putting the computer, okay? Things like that, okay? They're very colorful. Yeah? And that's natural.
So if your thinking is so strongly represented in the kind of mannerisms you exhibit in the material things around you, then could we also just pick up on nuances like these or tweaks like these that one would have maybe conversationally? Or is there like a formal assessment that is required? Like if I am a manager and I have to pick a team and make a wholesome team with by engaging every brain in the team, then should I be able to just do this very tactfully in the sense of how I converse with them, or what is the kind of dialogues that I could have? If you could perhaps give some examples that I should pick up and then fill out positions within the team.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the whole objectives of whole brain thinking is to be far more aware of the underlying processes that are happening. You see, most of us live in our own heads, don't we?
Right.
We live in our own heads. So if you start paying attention to how other people think and therefore they will behave, you'll be able to sort of recognize these clues, as we call it. Okay, and everything starts happening. Clues, you can recognize, people, the way they think, and we also have an app which allows you to do that. Actually. Oh yeah, it's all coded into the app. So you download the app because you can't take an HPD of everybody. You can actually then, those clues. Absolutely, you can actually create a guesstimate profile, which actually is pretty cool, pretty interesting.
Okay, and sir, there's another question by Satya which says, should good leaders be rational self or feeling self?
Sorry?
A good leader is a rational self or a feeling self?
A good leader can be anything, because that's nature and nurture, provided it recognizes that the impact he makes on his teammates. Okay, if I'm fundamentally more rational, I know that in certain situations I can come across as cold, so I have to modify that. That awareness is very critical. Yeah.
So these are the questions we have so far.
Great. So can I just share some resources and something else as well? Yeah.
Please do.
Hi, Ivan.
Hello.
Hello.
We are nearing close time. Are you sharing the resources now or later on, Prasad?
I showed a slide of the resources and also my contact details if people want to get in touch with me. That's okay with you.
Okay, please do.
Can you share the slide, please? The last two slides.
Or Prasad,
Yeah.
Will you be sharing some more details, some couple of articles on whole brain thinking for our participants?
Yes.
And
yes,
we can include your contact details with that.
Okay.
They can get in touch with you.
Sure, I'll do that. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
Good.
So feel free to get in touch with me if you wish. I will send you all a mail with some more interesting material that you'll definitely find useful.
So we, Prasad, thank you so much. Honestly, I wasn't much aware of this concept, the whole brain thinking. But when we started talking and it started evolving, and now during your session, I was absolutely attentive. Because imagine 66% productivity increases of teams. Wow, my God! And I think I the articles which you will send, I am going to go through them. This is and in today's times, considering the current situation that we are in, if we were to adapt this theory, this way of thinking, and tune ourselves or rather train ourselves, would be so beneficial. So thank you so much, Prasad, on behalf of National HRD Network, the Pura chapter, the entire team, and of course the participants. We had about more than 155. That was the last that I saw, and after that I got engrossed in the conversation on Mera. Another participants present. Thank you all the participants for having joined this, and I'm sure that you have found this effective as we have, and we will deep dive into this concept even more. Avneet, thank you so much for contributing to question answer. You made it more interesting. You engaged with Prasad in such a way that the conversation that you had, taking the questions further and expanding it. So
thank you
so much,
so much.
Anand and Avinash. दिल्ली में बैठे हुए हैं अविनाश बाबू हमारे जो है he manages the entire webinars for across India, Prasad. And I don't know how many thousands of people have, and probably over 15,000 people have already benefited. the webinars that we organize, and I think more than 100 webinars we've organized after pandemic. So thank you so much, and Prasad, we look forward to a long-term association with you. And
thank you.
Whenever we need, or we feel that our participants want to dig into your knowledge bank, we will call upon you. So thank you so much, everybody. Goodbye, and we can close the session.
This is the new normal now. We don't shake hands anymore. We do this.
So namaskar, फिर से आ गया नमस्कार नमस्ते. So अच्छा, एक रिक्वेस्ट है आनंद, if you are on the line, can you Anand and Avinash, if you can come on the screen and put on your videos, we'd like to take a picture screenshot for our records and our website and YouTube.
Sure, sir. We'll share the recording as well and the attendance list as well with you, sir.
हाँ, तो अभी वीडियो इस पे आ जाओ ना, स्क्रीन पे एक स्क्रीनशॉट लेते हैं.
Sure, sir. Just a second.
And
Avinash, what was the result of the polls actually? I was more interested in that as well. Avinash, the results of the polls? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. Okay. Interesting. 73%. Okay. Oh, that's actually quite quite revealing. Yeah. See, because you find that blue and green usually are the majority. It's true. Okay, most of them. And the other one? Oh, okay. That's good.
The red was just 25%, is it?
So 97% of them actually agree and strongly agree, which is good. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so what's the next step? Do I have to send? Is Anand there?
Yeah. No, I think he got dropped off.
Okay, fine.
But I think we can now close the session.
Okay.